Hey, what's going on YouTube, and welcome to another Season 7 League of Legends Champion Guide. Today, I'm going to cover reworked Galio, the Colossus, in the jungle.
Two birds with one stone? Have you met my parents?
So why exactly would you pick Galio jungle? Well, he's a very tanky champion that's really solid against high AP teams since he does scale off of his own magic resist. He's then got some great AoE damage which comes from multiple abilities, which gives him his really good jungle clear. He then brings a ton of crowd control, which is exactly what you want from a tanky champion, and he has a very high range ultimate so he can join a team fight from a rather long distance. You can be clearing your own jungle, and if your lane gets ganked, if you are in range, you can simply use your ultimate to jump in and counter gank them rather easily. Galio, however, is a rather skill shot reliant champion, and you must land multiple ones in succession to hold people in your tornado. You also have fairly long cooldowns, which is pretty annoying in the early game, but they go down every time you put a point in them, and of course we're going to focus on getting CDR cap. For your Masteries, you have a couple different options, but I feel like the best one is 18 Resolve and 12 Ferocity, grabbing Courage of the Colossus as your Keystone Mastery. You are the Colossus after all. Since you have multiple crowd controls, this is going to be incredibly easy to proc on Galio and will give you some nice added tankiness. For the rest of your Masteries, you'll pretty much just want to focus on getting some increased tankiness and increased damage. In this gameplay, I did take Thunderlord's Decree just to test it out, and it is pretty solid because it's easily procced by your Tornado ability, so if you do want increased damage instead, you can go for that, but generally, I'll go for Courage of the Colossus. For your runes, you'll want to go for Magic Penetration Reds, Armor Yellows, a mix of Scaling Cooldown Reduction and Magic Resist Blues, and Ability Power Quints. The extra 10% CDR at level 18 from our runes will give us that extra 10% because generally I only get 30% in my item build. Depending on the item build you go for, however, you may want to skip the cooldown reduction and just stick with straight up Magic Resist. We then take the Armor Yellows for its increased tankiness in the jungle and the Ability Power and Magic Penetration for increased damage. For your summoner spells, of course you're going to want to stick with Flash and Smite. Smite is required on a jungler so you can buy your jungler item, clear through the jungle, and secure dragons and barons when your team goes for them. Your Smite is also a great offensive tool when you get either your Skirmisher Saber or your Stalker's Blade. Flash is then required on Galio because of its great utility. It can save your life multiple times in a single game because it is a reliable escape, and you can even use it offensively to get kills that would have escaped. Combo it if you need to with your Justice Punch to close a very large gap. Your passive is Colossal Smash, and it's great for its passively added AoE damage that even scales off your magic resist. Galio's next basic attack is periodically modified to deal between 15 and 100 based on level plus 100% AD, 40% AP, and 40% bonus magic resist, total magic damage to its target, and all enemies around it. Colossal Smash's cooldown is reduced by 4 seconds every time Galio hits an enemy champion with an ability. So this passive has a static cooldown of 8 seconds, meaning it cannot be reduced by cooldown reduction, but as long as you can hit an enemy with 2 spells, it will be reduced to 0 anyways. Keep in mind that this has to be 2 new enemies, however. It'll add a nice chunk of extra damage in team fights and ganks, but it's even better in the jungle because your jungle clear is absolutely insane with this ability. When you combine this ability with your Q and E, you have a lot of AoE damage. Your Q ability is Winds of War, which is your bread and butter ability that creates a tornado, dealing magic damage per second. When activated, Galio fires 2 gusts of wind that arc to either side before converging to the target area, dealing magic damage to all enemies they pass through. Upon impacting each other, the gusts form a tornado that advances for 1.5 seconds, dealing magic damage every 0.5 seconds for every enemy within, capped at 100 per hit against monsters. So this here is a fantastic ability that has a decent AP ratio, but it also deals damage based on the target's maximum health. This is the main ability you're going to be looking to use to clear through the jungle and of course use for high damage in your ganks, and you use your E ability to hold them in place. The gust damage is okay on its own, but if you can hold people in your tornado, it's a pretty devastating ability. Your W is Shield of Durand, and it's a really solid defensive ability that can also be used to hold people in place. Passively, Galio gains a shield that absorbs between 8 and 23 based on level, percentage maximum health magic damage, refreshing after not taking damage for 12 seconds. On first cast, Galio begins to charge for 2 seconds, slowing himself by 30%, reducing incoming damage, and increasing Shield of Durand's taunt radius over the duration. On second cast, Galio taunts all enemies for up to 1.5 seconds, refreshing damage reduction. The damage reduction then even scales off of your bonus magic resistance, making it better than it already was. For this ability, you'll generally want to use it whenever you jump into a team fight with your E or ultimate. It will of course reduce the damage the targets deal to you, but also taunt them at the same time, so your carries can follow up with their damage as they're going to be relatively safe. It is viable to max this ability second behind your Q ability, but generally I like to save it for last. Your E ability is Justice Punch, and this is your primary gap closer that's also really solid because it does knock up the target for 0.75 seconds. When activated, Galio briefly dashes backwards before charging forward, stopping upon hitting terrain or an enemy champion, dealing magic damage to all enemies hit, knocking them up for 0.75 seconds. So like I said, this is a pretty damn solid ability because it is our gap closer, does a knock up, and even has a 70% AP ratio, which is pretty decent. The cooldown also goes down 1 second every time we put a point in the ability, so generally I like to max this with second behind our Q just for that added mobility. Our W ability, however, is just as viable of a max. This ability is best used after a Q ability because if you do hit the target that's in the tornado already, it will knock them up and hold them in there for a longer duration. Your ultimate is Hero's Entrance, which is a long-range initiation tool that provides allied damage reduction and also does a lot of damage. When activated, Galio designates the target allied champion's location at the time of the cast as his landing spot, channeling for 1 second, and then dashes to them, reducing the damage they take until he lands. Upon impact, Galio deals magic damage to all nearby enemies and knocks them up for 0.75 seconds, increasing to 1.25 seconds at the center of the impact zone. So this has multiple great uses, and the first one of course is to save an allied champion with the damage reduction. It's not quite as good as a Shen ultimate, but it's pretty damn close. Of course, this is obviously just a great way to get into a team fight or to counter gank. When you see an engage happen, use this to counter engage and knock up all the targets to provide a CC and get your carries into a better position. Try to use it so multiple targets will be in the center of the impact zone so they do get that higher duration CC. For your skill order, you'll first want to put a point into your ultimate whenever you can at 6, 11, and 16. Then focus on maxing your Q ability first because it is your highest damaging ability, and since it does do max health damage, it can be pretty devastating if they do sit in the tornado. We then have the choice of maxing our W or our E ability second. In most cases, I'll go for the E ability second so I do have more mobility, but a W max is very viable as well if you feel like you're going to be taking a lot of damage, and that damage reduction is going to be a lot more handy. Generally, I'll just get the one early point in W at level 3 so I can actually provide a CC and have some damage reduction, and then save it for last. For your main combo, you'll first want to hit the enemy with your Q ability and have them sitting inside the tornado. At this point, you'll want to activate your E ability to jump onto them and knock them up in the tornado so they sit in there, and then quickly hit them with an auto attack from your passive. At this point, you'll want to activate your W ability for its damage reduction, and then taunt the target when you feel like you need to. Here's what that combo will look like in normal speed, using your abilities after they come off cooldown. Galio has a pretty good jungle clear from all of the area of effect in his kit. You'll pretty much be able to start wherever you want and be able to clear the whole thing. Generally, this will be at either blue or red buff, but for the purposes of this video, I started at Razorbeaks just to test how good his jungle clear actually was. You then have the option of doing a quick gank at level 3 if you feel like one of your lanes is really weak and they'll have trouble, but personally, I like to do a full clear on Galio and then gank at level 4. Starting at either buff is fine, but usually I'll just go to where bot lane is so I know I'm going to get a good leash. For a normal lane gank, you'll want to start by hitting the enemy champion with your Winds of War, and then close the gap on them with your Justice Punch to knock them up inside the tornado from that Winds of War. Once you're at the enemy, you can use your Shield of Durand for its damage reduction, and reactivate it whenever you need to for its taunt. Whenever you're level 6 and have Hero's Entrance available, you can use that to jump into lane and make ganking even easier. This will reduce the damage your allied champion takes as well, making it a very good defensive. When you land, the targets around them will be knocked up and be dealt relatively good damage, making it a really good offensive at the same time. After you land, follow up with your normal combo to deal damage and provide crowd control. Galio is a pretty solid team fighter due to the damage reduction from his Hero's Entrance and high amount of crowd control. Since your Hero's Entrance has a fairly long range, you can make it to a team fight from a rather long distance. Make sure you use it on somebody who's taking a lot of damage and is near a good amount of targets so you can knock up multiple targets. When you land, you have the option of diving onto the backline and taunting the carries, or peeling for your own team with your taunt and knockups. This will definitely depend on the type of team comp you're using, but generally it's safer to peel for your own carries so you know that they can do their own damage. Now let's look at a couple hard matchups, and first up is Graves. Graves is a high damage champion with relatively good mobility, and usually he's not going to have too much trouble kiting you. You're not really going to want to 1v1 him too often, but you should have the advantage in team fights. Since he is a high damage champion, if you feel like he's the biggest threat on the enemy team, then make sure you're getting on top of him in team fights and apply your CCs. Next is Ivern, who's an incredibly annoying champion that's also pretty damn strong in team fights. In most cases, you should be able to win a 1v1 against him, but he does have some pretty good CCs, so sticking on top of him will be pretty hard for you. He's also a pretty counter-gankable champion, so try to keep eyes on him throughout the game, and when you see him going in for a gank, make sure you use your ultimate to shut that shit down. Next we have Nocturne, who's one of my favorite champions, and he's really good against Galio because of his long-range ultimate. If you end up going for a gank with your ultimate, he's going to be able to easily follow you with his own ultimate. Keep in mind, however, that you can do the exact same thing. He does, however, have a spell shield though, so he can block the knock-up from your ultimate. Try not to 1v1 him too often unless you're way ahead, and counter-gank him, don't let him counter-gank you. Last here we have Shaco, who is the king of invading. Even though you have a pretty good jungle clear, Shaco should have a pretty easy time invading you if he decides that's what he wants to do. Your E ability doesn't go through walls, so if he wants to fight you, you don't really have a choice but to fight him, unless of course you have flash. Try to place some defensive wards to watch for an invading Shaco, and just make it to the team fights because you're a lot stronger there than he is. Now let's finish this guide off with our item build, which starts with a Hunter's Talisman, refillable potion, and a warding totem. For your core build, you want to go for either Skirmishers or Stalkers enchanted with Cinderhulk, an Iceborne Gauntlet, and a Spirit Visage. If you feel like the enemy team is pretty mobile and you're going to struggle ganking, then you may want to go for the Stalkers, but otherwise go for the Skirmishers. The Iceborne Gauntlet will then give you some much needed cooldown reduction in damage, while also giving you some armor, and the Spirit Visage will give you that magic resist health and 10% more CDR. For your alternatives, you could go for a Runic Echoes if you instead felt like you needed some added damage, but usually I'll just go for the Cinderhulk. Then if you're against a very high AD team that relies on auto attacks, then you may want to get the Frozen Heart instead of the Iceborne Gauntlet. This will reduce your damage, but you'll be a lot tankier. For your boot options, you first have Merc Treads against high AP and CC teams, Ninja Tabis against high AD teams, Boots of Swiftness if you want all-around mobility, and Ionian Boots if you want 10% more CDR. Keep in mind, if you went for my rune page, you're already going to have 40% CDR at this point, so you're not really going to need Ionians. For your item pool, you first have the Rod of Ages. This is a really strong scaling item that gives you some nice ability power, but usually I'll save this for the top and mid lane. I don't really take it too much in the jungle. Then you have a bunch of armor options in the Randuin's, Deadman's Plate, and the Thornmail. Randuin's is great if you want to reduce crit damage from things like Yasuo, Deadman's Plate is great for added mobility, and Thornmail is fantastic against high AD teams if you wish to reflect some damage. Now since we do scale off of magic resist, of course we have some magic resist options as well. They would be Abyssal Scepter or Banshee's Veil. Abyssal Scepter is fantastic if you want to add some more damage and have 10% more CDR if you didn't have the 10% CDR from runes, and Banshee's Veil, fantastic for blocking spells. You could always get an item like Locket as well if your support decided that they didn't want to build it. For our last item in the item pool though, we have the Guardian Angel. It's a really solid late game item in case we do die, so we can come back to life. It also has some magic resistant armor on it, making it a fantastic defensive item. For our normal full build though, we'll take that core build, get some Merc Treads, then the Deadman's Plate, and a Guardian Angel. I usually like to go for the Deadman's Plate because the added mobility is really nice since we are a jungler and we're trying to gank, and the Guardian Angel is just so good in the late game, and it of course has some added magic resist, increasing our scaling. We'll be an insanely hard to bring down champion, yet have some pretty decent damage at the same time. But that, ladies and gentlemen, covers everything I've got for the reworked Galio in the jungle. Don't forget to check out the video description below for a link to all my social medias, and keep in mind I will be doing a stream either tomorrow or the day after, a 24-hour stream starting at 8 AM Eastern. The link to my Twitch channel is down there as well, so make sure you check that one out. Also, if you guys did enjoy the video, please make sure you like and subscribe, but other than that, thank you guys so much for checking out the video. I hope you guys did enjoy it, and I will see you guys in the next one. Take it easy. Peace.